Ice at the polls. Suddenly, Democrats care about election integrity. Good evening, everyone. I'm Haylee Ficuciello with Englebrook Independent News. Following my associate Jen Hodges' Sunday opinion piece regarding President Donald Trump's comment about potentially deploying immigration and customs enforcement agents near polling locations during the 2026 midterm election cycle, and following the absolute hysterical public meltdown from Democrat lawmakers, left-wing district attorneys, and cable news activists pretending to be journalists, I felt I had to give my take on Democratic's gaslighting campaigns currently unfolding across the country. Because honestly, the reaction from the political left has been one of the greatest accidental admissions of guilt I've seen in modern American politics. And trust me, that is saying something. So let me get this straight. For 10 years, Democrats have told American people that non-citizens never vote. Not rarely vote, not occasional vote. No, according to Democrats, it's basically never happening. When we were told voters' fraud was a myth, election integrity concerns were racist, voter ID laws were Jim Crow 2.0, asking whether only citizens should vote apparently made you some kind of extremist. But now suddenly the mere possibility of ICE agents existing somewhere near polling places has Democrats act like the apocalypse is upon us. Interesting, very interesting, because if illegal immigrants and non-citizens are not voting, then why exactly are Democrats panicking? What exactly are they afraid of? Seriously, if everyone voting is legally entitled to vote, then what is the problem? Wouldn't ICE agents simply stand around all day, bored out of their minds? Wouldn't Democrats be celebrating the opportunity to prove Republicans wrong once and for all? But instead, we got panic, we got outrage, we got threats. We got Democrat district attorneys practically foaming at the mouth, promising to arrest federal immigration officers. And suddenly, the same party that spent years screaming nobody is above the law became deeply offended by the possibility of enforcing immigration law near elections. You cannot make this stuff up. And let us talk about the media for a moment, because the media response has been absolutely priceless. CNN acted like federal agents standing near polling places would somehow recreate the fall of democracy. MSNBC practically needed grief counselors on standby. The New York Times and Washington Post immediately wrote out the favorite phrase authoritarian, fascist, voter intimidation, threat to democracy. Ah, yes. Because apparently requiring people to be citizens before voting in federal elections is now considered authoritarian. Welcome to 2026 America. And the funniest part, these are the exact same people who spent the last several years demanding more government surveillance, more federal agencies, more DOJ investigations, more censorship coordinations with big tech, more IRS monitoring, and more FBI involvement in domestic affairs. But now suddenly federal authority is dangerous. Now suddenly Democrats are civil libertarians. Please, nobody buys it anymore. And here's where the Democrat gaslights becomes impossible to ignore. Democrats spend years telling Americans there was no evidence of non-citizens voting, except there is evidence. There have been federal prosecutions, there have been arrests, there have been documented cases. In fact, just recently here in New Jersey, federal prosecutors charged 4 non-citizens accused of illegally registering and voting in federal elections. Oops, that's awkward, very awkward, especially after years of Democrats insisting never happens. Now, of course, the media immediately pivoted to, well, it's rare. So now it does happen. Thank you for finally catching up with the rest of us. And this is the problem Democrats create for themselves. They spent so many years denying reality that now every time a real case appears, it destroys their credibility even more. Because Americans are not stupid. Contrary to what many politicians believe, voters actually can recognize contradiction, and this contradiction is enormous. If non-citizens never voted, why oppose citizen verification laws? Why oppose voter ID? Why oppose proof of citizen requirements? Why oppose cleaning voter rolls? Why oppose auditing election systems? Why oppose literally every single election security proposal Republicans put forward? The answer is plainly obvious. Democrats do not want scrutiny. That is what it's really about. And let us discuss so-called SAVE Act, because Democrats absolutely lost their minds over the legislation too. The SAVE Act would require document proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. That's it. That is the terrifying extremist Democrats are fighting against. Proof of citizen. The thing required for citizenship, and Democrats call it dangerous. Why? Because according to them, asking people to provide proof citizenship before voting is somehow oppressive. Meanwhile, Americans need identification to drive, travel, buy certain medication, open bank accounts, purchase firearms, rent apartments, cash checks, apply for jobs, and sometimes even to buy cold medicine. But voting in federal elections, apparently that should operate entirely on the honor system. Completely normal, totally reasonable, nothing suspicious whatsoever. And then you have Democrat lawmakers making statements that the age like expired milk. Remember when Stacey Abrams repeatedly claimed suppression was everywhere but somehow could never explain how requiring identification was racist? Remember when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested voter ID laws disproportionately harm minorities because, according to her argument, many Americans supposedly cannot access IDs? Which is fascinating considering millions of Americans somehow manage to obtain IDs every single year to function in society. Then there was the former President Joe Biden comparing election integrity laws to Jim Crow. Yes, requiring proof of citizenship became comparable to segregation in Democratic imagination because apparently hyperbole is now an official policy platform. And let us not forget Representative Ilhan Omar, who previously criticized stricter election security efforts while simultaneously accusing Republicans of trying to suppress immigrant communities. Again, if only citizens are voting, what exactly is the concern? Democrats never answered the questions directly, ever, because they cannot. Instead, they emotionally manipulate the conversation. They accuse critics of racism. They scream democracy is under attack. They create fear. And then they hope nobody notices the giant logical hole sitting directly in the middle of the argument. But Americans are noticing now, especially after the southern border crisis exploded under the Biden administration, especially after millions of illegal border crossings, especially after sanctuary cities became overwhelmed, especially after cities like Chicago, New York, Denver, Los Angeles started buckling under the financial pressure. Suddenly, voters started asking uncomfortable questions, questions Democrats desperately do not want to answer. Questions like, how many non-citizens are currently on the voter rolls? How many are voter rolls actually audited? How many states verify citizenship status effectively? How many cases go undetected? Democrats hate these questions because the questions themselves expose weakness in the system. And that is why they react so aggressively to Trump's ICE comment, not because they suddenly care about protecting democracy. Please. These are the same people who spent years trying to remove political opponents from the ballots, censor dissent online, pressure social media companies to suppress stories, and weaponize federal agencies against critics. The same people who claim democracy was sacred while simultaneously trying to criminalize opposition. So spare us the dramatic speech. What Democrats actually fear is public attention. They fear scrutiny. They fear Americans paying closer attention to elections. And they especially fear Americans realizing how aggressively Democrats oppose even the most basic verification measures. Because once voters notice the pattern, the entire narrative becomes collapsing. And the district attorneys threatening to arrest federal agents? That has been one of the most absurd part of it all. Imagine being tougher on ICE agents than actual criminals. Imagine living in cities where violent crimes explode, retail thefts skyrocket, homeless spirals out of control, fentanyl floods the communities, and illegal immigrants overwhelm local services. Yet somehow, ICE agents near polling agents become the greatest threat to democracy. That tells you everything. Priorities, complete backward priorities. And this is why trust in Democratic leadership continues eroding nationwide. Americans are tired of being gaslit. They are tired of being told not to believe what they can see in plain sight. They are tired of being called extremists for wanting secure elections. And they are tired of watching politicians manipulate immigration policies while pretending public concern is somehow irrational. The truth is simple. simple. If elections are secure, verification should not scare anyone. If elections are secure, verification should not scare anyone. If only citizens are voting, proof of citizenship should not be controversial. And if non-citizens are truly never voting, the Democrats should have absolutely nothing to worry about. But judging from the panic we witnessed this week, it certainly seems like they're worried about something. Very worried. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, Senior Correspondent for Englebrook Independent News. Good night.